On May 24, 2026, Bigfoot took me into the woods, and I didn't come home for 10 days. I woke up in a place where my survival depended entirely on the creature that had put me there. Eventually, I found myself preparing for an escape, knowing there was an extremely high chance it would cost me my life. My name is Jessica Trahan. I'm 31, and I work in logistics. Most of my days are spreadsheets, timelines, phone calls, and people needing things done immediately. It's the kind of job that doesn't really end when you leave the office. It just follows you home and waits for you there. By the time that weekend rolled around, I was exhausted. I'd been running on caffeine, takeout, and maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night for weeks. 2 of my friends had been trying to get me out of the house for a while. Eventually, I gave in. The plan was to spend a few hours on the trail and get away from work for a bit. My friends were coming from farther away, so I got there first and figured I'd start walking while I waited for them to catch up. It was a Saturday morning in late May. The weather was perfect, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. Standing there, I remember thinking that getting outside had been the best decision I'd made in a long time. But before the day was over, I'd be taken by something that wasn't human. My 2 friends arrived at the trailhead about an hour after I headed in. They expected to catch up with me on the trail, but when they couldn't find me, they started calling my name and trying my phone. After checking side trails and waiting for hours at the trailhead, they realized something was wrong. By the time anyone official was looking for me, I was already somewhere no search party was going to find easily. I guess if there's a lesson in all of this, it's that I should have just stayed at my desk. I hadn't done much hiking before this. A few easy trails here and there, but nothing that required much planning. For this trip, I did a little research, borrowed a backpack from a friend, and packed what seemed sensible: water, snacks, a small knife I'd had for years, bear spray, an emergency whistle, a headlamp, and one of those foil emergency blankets they sell near the checkout of outdoor stores. I also brought my phone and a small camera. I wanted to film parts of the hike and have something to look back on afterward. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It took me a second to realize what felt wrong. The birds were gone. I couldn't remember when I'd last heard them, only that at some point the forest had gone completely quiet. I slowed down and put my camera away. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, something felt off. Then I saw the print. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. My entire boot fit inside it, and there was still room around the edges. It wasn't a bear track. It wasn't anything I recognized. Once I started looking, I found more. Same shape, same size, same depth. They ran parallel to the trail instead of crossing it. Whatever had made them had been moving in the same direction I was moving, close enough that I should have heard it. That's when I realized it hadn't passed through before I got there. It had been beside me. I ran. My pack bounced against my back, my camera swung from my wrist, and I nearly lost my footing more than once, but I didn't slow down. I just wanted distance between me and whatever had been following me through those trees. Then, underneath the sound of my own footsteps, I heard something else. Heavy footsteps, moving through the trees to my right. I cut off the trail and into the woods, convinced I could lose it if I stayed out of sight. I ducked behind a cluster of trees and listened. My legs were shaking, my heart was pounding, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten away. Then I heard footsteps somewhere to my left. Whatever was out there wasn't searching for me. It was moving through the trees at an easy pace, like it already knew where I was. I took off again and eventually broke back onto the trail. I kept looking for something, anything. Another hiker, a ranger, a road, some sign that the normal world still existed beyond those trees. Instead, all I saw was more forest. And every so often, I would hear it moving out there with me. I stopped when I couldn't run anymore, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to pull air into my lungs. As my breathing started to settle, I let myself believe I'd finally lost it. Then my phone rang. It was my friends. I answered without thinking. Hearing their voices felt like grabbing hold of something real again. They were asking where I was, why I wasn't answering my phone, whether I was okay. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea where I was. I started looking around, trying to get my bearings, scanning the trees and the trail. That's when I saw it, standing between the trees maybe 20 feet away. The longer I looked at it, the more one detail sank in. It had been there before I stopped. It hadn't chased me into that spot. It had been waiting there the whole time. I hadn't been running from it. I'd been running toward it. I could still hear my friends' voices coming through the phone, but they sounded far away. Nothing they were saying mattered anymore. I turned and ran for my life. What happened next couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds. Something that large should not have been able to move that fast. I had barely made it down the trail before it closed the distance. One moment, it was behind me, and the next, my feet weren't touching the ground anymore. The world seemed to lurch sideways. Trees blurred past. Branches snapped. I kicked, twisted, and fought as hard as I could, but it didn't matter. I might as well have been fighting a landslide. I remember one completely ridiculous thought cutting through the panic. I still had my backpack on. For some reason, that was what my brain chose to focus on, while everything else was falling apart. My friends were still shouting through the phone. I could hear them calling my name, demanding to know what was happening. Then the forest swallowed every other sound, and after that, everything changed. I focused on staying conscious. That was the only thing that mattered. I couldn't get a good look at it from the way I was being carried. I was mostly aware of its size, the heat coming off it, and the fact that I wasn't going anywhere unless it decided otherwise. The grip wasn't painful, but it was impossible to fight. I tried once anyway. It adjusted its hold without slowing down or showing the slightest sign of effort, and that was enough to make me stop. After that, I just watched the forest slide past and tried to pay attention to anything that might matter later. The direction we were moving, the angle of the sun, the way the trees seemed to grow thicker the deeper we went. I kept thinking about my friends. By then, they were probably arriving at the trailhead, expecting to find me somewhere up the trail. I wondered how long it would take before they realized I wasn't coming back. How long before concern turned into panic? How long before anyone started looking for me at all? By the time it finally stopped, the light had changed. The forest felt darker, denser, and far removed from the trail I'd started on that morning. We had covered a lot of ground, more than I wanted to think about. It set me down inside what I can only describe as a den. It looked like a natural formation, with rock walls on 3 sides and an opening on the 4th that was partially blocked by fallen timber. At first, I assumed the logs had fallen there naturally, but the longer I looked, the more it seemed like they had been dragged into place. The ceiling was low and the floor was packed with earth that had been flattened over a long period of time. This wasn't a place something had stumbled across recently. It had been used before, over and over again, and whatever had been used wasn't small. I sat up and looked around. The smell hit me first. It was dense and animal, with an old stale quality that seemed to cling to the back of my throat. Enough light came through the entrance to see by, but not enough to make out every detail. The first thing I did was check myself over. Nothing seemed broken. My backpack was still on, which felt like the only piece of good news I'd had in the last hour. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared at the entrance. It wasn't blocked. As far as I could tell, I could have stood up and walked straight out. The problem was that every instinct I had was telling me not to. I couldn't explain why, but I was certain it was still nearby. The opening felt less like an escape route and more like a test. So I stayed where I was, sitting against the rock wall, listening to the forest outside, and trying to think clearly about what had happened to me and what I was going to do next. My 2 friends had been on that trail for hours by the time they accepted that something was seriously wrong. They'd heard everything on that phone call, the running, the screaming, and then the sudden silence. Neither of them was willing to leave without at least trying to find me. They went in after me. One of them had the foresight to mark the trail as they searched, breaking branches at eye level and tying strips of fabric to trees every so often. It was a simple idea, but a smart one. Later, it would probably be the reason they made it back out without creating a second emergency for the people who eventually came looking for me. They found my camera first. Not long after that, they found the tracks. They followed them deeper into the forest than they probably should have, driven by the hope that they were getting closer to me. That changed when they got a good look at the prints. The size, the depth, and the distance between each step didn't make sense. Whatever had left them was far larger than anything either of them expected to find in those woods. That was the point where they made the right decision. They turned around, followed their markers back to the trailhead, and went for help. Before they left, one of them stood in the parking lot and stared at the tree line for a long time. I don't know what they were thinking about. I only know that by then, I was already far beyond where anyone was looking. Getting help wasn't as straightforward as it should have been. They reported what they'd seen, the phone call, the screaming, the tracks, and the response they got was careful and measured in a way that didn't match the urgency of what they were describing. A missing person report couldn't be filed until 24 hours had passed. That was the rule. They were told to go home, stay reachable, and wait. They didn't go home, they drove to my family instead. What happened after that is really their story, not mine. What I do know is that my family was on the phone making calls within the hour, pushing every contact they had, and refusing to wait 24 hours before doing something. By the next morning, I was officially a missing person. The search started the following day. They set up a base camp at the trailhead. There were search teams, dogs, radios, and organized grid searches. Day after day, teams came back with nothing that led anywhere. My family stayed at that camp, my friends too. They were all out there looking for me while I was less than a day's walk away in a place nobody was ever going to find by accident. That's the part that stays with me, how close I was and how completely unreachable. It came back before dark. I heard it before I saw it, that displacement of sound that comes with something very large moving through trees. It ducked through the entrance and filled the space in a way that made the den feel suddenly much smaller. I pressed myself against the wall and watched. It didn't look at me immediately. It moved to the other side and crouched, and for a few minutes it simply stayed there, breathing like an animal settling in after a long day. Then it turned and looked directly at me. I had seen it in motion during the carry, pieces of it, impressions. This was different. This close, in the low gray light filtering through the entrance, it was fully real in a way my brain had been refusing to accept since the trail. Broad, heavy-browed, dark eyes that caught the light in a way that didn't feel like an animal's eyes. I reached slowly into my pack and wrapped my hand around the bear spray. It had seemed like a smart thing to bring that morning. Looking at it now, I wasn't sure the manufacturer had this situation in mind, so I didn't end up using it. The den was too enclosed. Whatever it did to something that size in a space that small, I'd feel it too. I let go and sat very still and held its gaze because looking away felt worse than not looking away. My phone still had some battery left that first night. Not much. I'd spent the morning filming and taking pictures, and by then the battery was already low. Still, it was enough to try. I turned the brightness all the way down and called anyway. There was no signal. I moved around the den, holding the phone up in different places, watching the screen and hoping something would change. Nothing did. I tried more than once, but every call went nowhere. The whole time, it was watching me. I don't know if it understood what the phone was, but it was paying attention. Every movement seemed to catch its attention, so I kept myself slow and careful. Later, when it seemed to settle down, I turned away and curled around the phone so the screen light wouldn't be visible. Then I recorded a voice message as quietly as I could. I said my name, the date, and everything I could remember about where I'd been before I was taken. I didn't let myself cry. I was too afraid of drawing attention to myself. I just said what I needed to say, saved the recording, and hoped someone might hear it one day. By the next morning, the battery was gone. I'd spent too much time checking for signal and making sure the recording had been saved. The screen went black and never came back on. After that, I had nothing. No phone, no light, no way to contact anyone. Just the den, the entrance, and whatever daylight managed to make its way inside. The first time I really saw its face was on the second day. It came back sometime that morning and, instead of going straight to its usual spot, stopped a few feet from where I was sitting. My back was already against the rock wall, so there was nowhere for me to go. I stayed still, tried to keep my breathing steady, and waited. It was enormous up close in a way that I hadn't fully understood before. During the carry, I'd only caught glimpses of it through panic and confusion. This was different. The face was broad and heavy-browed, covered in dark hair, except around the eyes and across the bridge of the nose. The eyes were what I kept coming back to. They were dark, steady, and focused in a way that felt wrong for an animal. I don't know how else to describe it. There was an awareness there that I still have trouble putting into words. It looked at me for a long time. I looked back because, for some reason, looking away felt like a mistake. We just sat there watching each other in silence until it finally turned and walked away. That was it. No aggression or any sound, no sudden movement, just a long look, as though it was trying to figure something out. And then it lost interest. I remember sitting there afterward trying to decide whether that interaction had made me feel safer or more afraid. On the second day, it arrived with something and set it down in the space between us. Then it sat back and watched. The food itself, I don't know exactly what it was. Some kind of meat. I just stared at it. I was hungry, but I was also scared out of my mind. The longer it sat there, the less comfortable I got. It was obvious I wasn't touching it. After a while, it sat forward and let out a low rumble. Then it reached out and shoved the food a little closer to me. I still couldn't bring myself to eat it. Eventually, I picked it up and made it look like I had. Then I wrapped it and shoved it into my pack when it wasn't paying attention. That seemed good enough. It eventually got up and left, and I remember feeling strangely relieved that I'd gotten through whatever that interaction had been. The next time it brought food, it watched me too closely for that. Every time I moved, its eyes followed me. I tried waiting it out, but it didn't leave. It just sat there watching. By then, I had the feeling that refusing wasn't an option I could keep testing. So I ate. When I finished, something about its posture changed. Not much, but enough for me to notice. It settled back almost immediately. That was when I realized there was some kind of logic to what was happening. It expected certain things from me. I just didn't know what they were yet. By the third day, I had stopped thinking about escape every second. Not because I'd given up, but constantly running through plans in my head was exhausting, and I needed whatever energy I had left for things that might actually help. So I started paying attention differently, not just to it, but to everything around me. The entrance, the rock walls, the fallen timber partially blocked the opening. I noticed that it had to crouch to get through, and I kept wondering whether that might matter if I ever got a chance to run. I studied the den the same way I would have studied a problem at work, looking for anything I'd missed the first time. I also started watching its routine, when it left, when it came back, how long it stayed gone. At first, none of it made much sense. Some days it was gone for what felt like hours. Other times, it would leave and come back much sooner. There didn't seem to be any obvious pattern. Still, I kept watching. I needed something to work with, and by then, I'd convinced myself that if I paid close enough attention, sooner or later, I'd find it. I just had to stay alive long enough to figure it out. It was around day 5 that I started looking at the den itself differently. For the first few days, I'd been focused on the entrance, on it, and on anything that seemed connected to getting out. I hadn't paid much attention to the den itself. When I finally did, I started noticing things I should have noticed earlier. The walls had markings on them, not carvings exactly, more like places where the rock had been worn smooth over time. Certain parts of the floor were packed down harder than others, almost forming a path between the entrance and the far corner. None of it looked recent. This place had been used for a long time. Then I found the hoodie. It was half buried under debris in the far corner, pushed against the wall like it had been there for a while. Dark gray, youth-sized. There was a school logo on the front from a town I recognized, maybe a couple of hours from where I'd parked that morning. Up until then, I'd been trying to survive. After that, I was trying to get out. I kept the hoodie on after that, told myself it was for warmth, and left it at that. The markings on the wall stayed in the back of my mind, though. Over the next few days, I found myself studying them whenever it was gone. Some looked like nothing more than worn spots in the rock, but others seemed too deliberate to ignore. Not language, at least not anything I recognized, but marks that had been made on purpose and over a long period of time. The hoodie bothered me too, because it meant someone had been here before me. By day 6, I was sitting there wearing a stranger's hoodie and staring at markings that nobody outside those woods had probably ever seen. That's when a thought finally settled in. This wasn't random. I hadn't just wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. Something had noticed me, followed me, and taken me. By day 7, I finally had something to work with. The pattern wasn't perfect, but it was there. The longest stretches when it was gone seemed to happen in the early morning, before the sunlight reached very far into the den. Not every day, but often enough that I started paying close attention. A few mornings it had been gone for what felt like hours. By day 7, it left before sunrise and didn't come back until the den was bright enough to see clearly. For the first time since I'd been taken, I started thinking seriously about getting out. There wasn't much I could do to prepare. Everything I had was what I'd arrived with. The knife, the bear spray, the whistle, the lighter. I went over each one in my head. The whistle was probably my best chance if I got far enough away. The lighter might help if things went badly. The knife was there because it had to be, not because I thought it would do much good. I decided I was going to wait until day 9. I wanted one more morning to make sure I wasn't imagining the pattern. One more chance to be certain before I bet everything on it. That night, for the first time in a week, I went to sleep with something that felt like a plan. By then, I'd started referring to the next morning as D-Day. Normally, D-Day meant things like product launches, impossible deadlines, or the moment payroll finally hit my account. This one involved sprinting into the woods and hoping for the best. The day before I was supposed to run, I finally lost my patience. It had come back that evening and settled into its usual spot across the den. Nothing unusual, nothing different. By that point, though, I'd been trapped there for more than a week, and I was tired, hungry, filthy, and running out of reasons to stay quiet. So I spoke. At first, I just asked questions. Why was I there? What did it want from me? Was it going to let me leave? Then I got angry. I started raising my voice, demanding answers, telling it to let me go. None of it made any sense. I knew that, even while I was doing it. But after 8 days, I didn't care. The reaction was immediate. It straightened up and made a sharp sound I'd never heard before. Not loud, but forceful enough to cut me off in the middle of a sentence. Then it turned its head toward the entrance and stayed completely still. Then it looked back at me. I don't know how to explain why, but the message felt obvious. For me to shut up. I didn't say another word that night. By day 8, the conversation nobody wanted to have was starting to happen around the edges of the search camp. 8 days had passed, and the forest had given them nothing. Every lead had gone cold. Every search area had come up empty. My friends pushed back hard. They kept repeating the same things they'd been saying from the beginning. The phone call, the screaming, the tracks they had found. They argued that whatever had happened to me wasn't a normal missing person case, and that normal search methods weren't going to find me. The problem was that nobody knew what to do with that. There wasn't a protocol for the story they were telling. My family refused to give up. They asked for one more full push into the forest, the largest search effort yet, reaching farther than any of the previous teams had gone. The request was approved. The next morning, they were going back into the woods. The same morning I was planning to get out. The day had finally come. The window opened earlier than usual. It was gone before there was much light coming through the entrance. Earlier than any morning I'd tracked, I started counting as soon as the sound of it moving through the trees faded away. 500, 600, 700, nothing. I stood up and put my pack on, tightened the straps, took out the whistle, and kept it in my hand. The bear spray was clipped where I could reach it quickly, and the lighter was tucked into my jacket pocket. Then I moved to the entrance and waited. For a full minute, I just listened. The forest was starting to wake up. Birds, wind moving through the trees, early morning light filtering through the canopy. Nothing that sounded like it was coming back. Then I stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately. After more than a week inside that den, the open space almost felt unreal. I gave myself a few seconds. Then I picked a direction downhill and started moving. I ran as fast as I could. I never looked back. The ground was uneven and covered in roots, and I went down hard more than once, but I got up and kept moving. My body was in rough shape by then. I'd spent more than a week barely eating and barely moving, and my legs felt it. But fear can carry you farther than you think. At some point, I pulled out the whistle and started using it. 3 short blasts every few minutes while I moved, hoping somebody out there might hear it. Then I heard something moving in the same direction I was. I didn't turn around. I blew the whistle again and kept going. A few minutes later, I heard a voice, a man calling back somewhere ahead. I changed direction immediately and started pushing toward it, crashing through brush and branches without caring how much noise I was making. At that point, all I cared about was getting to another human being. The man turned out to be a local hunter who had joined the search, older, wearing a heavy jacket with a rifle slung over his shoulder. When I stumbled out of the trees and into view, he took one look at me and started moving my way. By then, my legs were barely holding me up. He caught me before I hit the ground. I told him we needed to keep moving and that something was behind me. He didn't ask questions. He just got me moving and led me through the woods. I don't know how long we walked after that. It felt like a long time. Eventually, we reached a fire road. The moment I stepped onto it, whatever had been keeping me moving finally ran out. Everything after that happened fast. People arrived, checked me over, handed me water, and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I remember looking back toward the tree line and having a hard time believing I was actually out. The search camp wasn't far away. As soon as word got back, my family headed straight for the road. I've been home for a little over a week now. I still sleep with the light on. Sometimes I wake up suddenly and for a moment think I'm still in that den. I'm getting used to being home again, but some things still feel strange. Crowded places tire me out faster than they used to, and I catch myself paying attention to sounds I never would have noticed before. People keep asking what took me. They want an answer that makes sense. This is the only answer I have. I was taken on May 24th, 2026. I was gone for 10 days, and I was abducted by Bigfoot.